Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologues. In case you haven't heard, I'm told there's an election coming up pretty soon. In some areas, there's a lot of violence and civil unrest. If you're in the market for personal protection for yourself or your family, I'd encourage you to visit Guns Etc. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet and they have product. And they're getting new product all the time. They'll work with you to get the exact type of protection that fits your needs. Stop by their store in Mesa or visit gunsetcetera.com where you'll have access to over $400 million worth of firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back. Happy October 13th, 2020. It's interesting to me what line or set of cases becomes most important to the Senate when advising and consenting on Supreme Court justices. In the past, a lot of pressure was put on nominees over issues of race or issues of life. Today, it is those, but given more primacy is the issue of health care, Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. We seem to revisit this movie reel every time there is a vacancy on the Supreme Court. Why are these stakes so high? We watch the senators, primarily Democrats, asking about this issue or that issue. But notice what they do not ask about. Amy Barrett's views on the Constitution. They are asking instead her views of various favored and disfavored pieces of legislation. I, for one, would rather hear not what kind of legislator she would be, but what view of the Constitution she has. Isn't that why we are here? Why does Sheldon Whitehouse spend his time today, as he did, declaiming against purportedly conservative judicial organizations, outside organizations, for 30 minutes? Maybe we have those groups to counter their organizations that he didn't bring up, like the ACLU or the Alliance for Justice and so many others that first went after Robert Bork, got him, and then hunted for other legal scalps. They can have their organizations. Evidently, we can't have ours to counter them. They want us and like us when we were weak, or, as Judge Robert Bork put it, when there were no groups on our side to answer the groups on their side. That's the way it works now, especially with the left. There is but one legitimate perspective, point of view, territory of opinions and views, and it can only be the left and Democratic parties' territory. As far back as the 19th century, Alexis de Tocqueville noted in his book Democracy in America, there's hardly any political question in the United States that sooner or later does not turn into a judicial question. From that, the obligation that the parties find in their daily polemics to borrow ideas and language from the judicial system. Since most public men are or have formerly been jurists, they make the habits and the turn of ideas that belong to jurists pass into the handling of public affairs. The jury ends up by familiarizing all classes with them. Thus, judicial language becomes, in a way, the common language. So the spirit of the jurist, born inside the schools and courtrooms, spreads little by little beyond their confines. It infiltrates all of society, so to speak. It descends to the lowest ranks, and the entire people finishes by acquiring a part of the habits and tastes of the magistrate. This is not a good thing. But it is why the parties, and especially the Democratic Party, make partisan politics in the judiciary and judicial appointments such a blood sport. Why not use their experts as a super legislature or super majority to get what they want or cannot get at the ballot box? Well, to start, that's not what the courts were for, neither in the view of the Federalist writers, our founders, nor in the view of even our first Supreme Court justices, never mind Chief Justices. As John Marshall put it, we must never forget that it is a Constitution we are here to expound. I mentioned John Marshall yesterday, and with all the talk that it is an outrage that we are going through a nomination ahead of an election, it is worth mentioning John Marshall again. I mentioned this yesterday. People asked, I repeat it. Marshall is deemed by acclamation to be our country's greatest Chief Justice. He not only gave us the notion of judicial review in Marbury versus Madison, he was the longest-serving Chief Justice in Supreme Court history. Fellowships and law schools are named after him. If you think nominating a justice ahead of an election is inappropriate, John Marshall was inappropriate. He was nominated to the Supreme Court after the president who nominated him lost the presidential election to his opponent in the opposing party, but when the nominating president was finishing off his last days as a lame duck. Jefferson won the election of 1800, beating John Adams. And then, before Jefferson was sworn in, Adams, the lame duck, nominated John Marshall to the Supreme Court as Chief Justice. Again, after Jefferson won the election, but before Jefferson was sworn in. Consider the analogy. Donald Trump loses to Joe Biden. Stephen Breyer resigns, and before Joe Biden is sworn in, Trump nominates a conservative justice to the Supreme Court, and the Senate confirms him, perhaps sometime in early January or late December. Would that not be a fortiori even more upsetting to the Democrats than is the nomination of Amy Barrett? Well, that is what John Adams did, and this is how we got the greatest Chief Justice in our history. So let's dispense with this au courant outrage that what Donald Trump and the Republicans are doing is either wrong or without precedent. That aside, I always think of these nominations as teachable moments about the Constitution and constitutional rights. Nobody in the Senate seems to remember the important Federalist Paper 78 written by Alexander Hamilton. There he wrote, quote, "Whoever attentively considers the different departments of power must perceive that in a government in which they are separated from each other, the judiciary, from the nature of its functions, will always be the least dangerous to the political rights of the Constitution, because it will be least in a capacity to annoy or injure them," close quote. The least in a capacity to annoy or injure our rights. How far have we traveled since then? We seem to think less and less of this as time goes on, and so much more the shame considering we just celebrated less than a month ago 233 years of our Constitution. Remember that celebration, September 17th? Aside from discussing it here, I actually don't remember much about it either. So much more the shame. 33 years ago, at the 200th anniversary, President Ronald Reagan spoke to the meaning of September 17th, 1787, saying, quote, "It was with the writing of our Constitution, setting down the architecture of democratic government, that the noble sentiments and brave rhetoric of 1776 took on substance, that the hopes and dreams of the revolutionists could become a living, enduring reality. All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Until that moment, some might have said that that was just a high-blown sentiment, the dreams of a few philosophers and their hot-headed followers. But could one really construct a government, run a country, with such idealistic notions? But once those ideals took root in living, functioning institutions, once those notions became a nation, well, then, as I said, the revolution could really begin, not just in America, but around the world. A revolution to free man from tyranny of every sort and secure his freedom the only way possible in this world, through the checks and balances and institutions of limited democratic government." Thank you, Ronald Reagan. How fares our understanding of all that just 33 years later? At a minimum, it requires us to understand the Constitution and the point of it. One can claim something is constitutional or anti-constitutional, but it doesn't make it so just because they claim it, any more than, per Jerry Seinfeld, one can say you have a car reservation even if they're not holding the reservation. What does it mean to say we are expounding a constitution? Thinking about that, I always like to start by relating the story Walter Burns tells in his book on patriotism. Our unique place in the world is recognized elsewhere, sometimes grudgingly or inadvertently. In 1987, the bicentenary of our Constitution, I was in Brazil, where the people had recently overthrown a military dictatorship and had begun the process of writing a democratic constitution. I had been invited to lecture on constitutionalism. At one place, a university, after I had finished my prepared remarks, someone got up and denounced, not me, but the local official who had brought me in. Why, he shouted, did you invite an American? What can they tell you about constitutions? They've only had one. Why didn't you invite a Bolivian? They've had 100. Let's stay with Burns a few moments, because I think it gets to our present larger discontent and disturbances. Something about American patriotism and brotherly or filial duty to one another and our country. Burns writes, "It would be convenient to believe that citizens will be patriots, but in fact neither citizenship nor patriotism can be taken for granted, especially in a liberal democracy like the United States. In the traditional sense, patriots are citizens who love their country simply because it is their country, because it is their birthplace and the mansion of their fathers, as Alexis de Tocqueville put it in Democracy in America. Citizenship and patriotism were one and the same thing in Sparta. It was kind of a filial piety. But America is no Sparta. Citizenship has, first of all, a legal meaning for us. According to the Constitution, see Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, a citizen is any person born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. But citizenship is, even for us, more than legal status and the enjoyment of privileges and immunities attached thereto. It is, in a larger sense, a sentiment or state of mind, an awareness of sharing an identity with others to whom one is related by nationality, if not by blood, a sense of belonging to a community for which one bears some responsibility. In a word, citizenship implies public spiritedness, and it is in this sense that it cannot be taken for granted. Like patriotism, after all, it has to be cultivated. How do we maintain it all? As Abraham Lincoln put it in his electric cord speech, Abraham Lincoln, whose statue was torn down in Portland, Oregon on Sunday, he put it this way: those not living during the Revolution look to the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal," and then they feel that the moral sentiment taught in that day evidences their relation to those men, that it is the father of all moral principle in them, and that they have a right to claim it as though they were blood of the blood and flesh of the flesh of the men who wrote the Declaration, because they are. That is the electric cord in that declaration that links the hearts of patriotic and liberty-loving men together. That will link those patriotic hearts as long as the love of freedom exists in the minds of men throughout the world. Close quote. Makes one think about how the left today tries to vitiate and weaken our private associations and their attendant necessities like freedom of speech, religion, and association. What is it they have forgotten or destroyed that makes them think this is okay? They force us to declare certain positions, punish us for not declaring them. Or as Professor Burns put it, nothing still distinguishes us so sharply, though, from the classical republic, or bears more directly on the issue of citizenship than the principles governing our birth as a nation and then incorporated in the republic we ordained and established. These principles gave rise to an altogether new understanding of what it means to be a patriotic American citizen. To paraphrase a line from Abraham Lincoln's 1862 message to Congress, our case is new, so we had to think and act anew. So here it is appropriate to say a few words about the newness of our case, or to recall the motto inscribed on the Great Seal of the United States, reproduced on every dollar bill. What is it that made for a novus ordo seclorum, new order of the ages, which is to say something new on the scene? We were the first nation to declare its independence by appealing not to the past, but to the newly discovered laws of nature and of nature's God. And this had and has consequences for patriotism. Whereas the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob imposed duties on all men, see Exodus, nature's God endowed all men with rights, and the God of the New Testament commanded all men to love God and their neighbors as themselves, see Matthew. I don't know. It just seems to me just now we all could have used a reminder on that. What inspired our Constitution and what constitutionalism means. Not what different pieces of legislation mean to a Supreme Court justice, but what constitutionalism means to someone who is to be expounding the Constitution. I say that because when we read about people like Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, we read today more about them being torn down and destroyed, at least statues of them, and not, after all, the lessons they taught.